Let's talk prophecy. Hi, I am former Fundy. Welcome to my channel if you are new. If you're a return viewer, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And if you aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. I've recently actually started looking at my analytics, and most of you watching are not subscribed. So if you've watched more than one video, hit that subscribe button for me, please. I want to talk about prophecy today. 1, I want to talk about a prophetic word I received. 2, I want to talk about my mom's prophetic giftings. And 3, I want to talk about my prophetic giftings. So first, the prophetic word I received and the interesting prophet that my parents had come speak at their church on multiple occasions, most of them when I was not there. But the one I was there, he gave me a word. And the word was almond. Yeah, a single word. The word that God gave him to give to me was almond. And he followed it up with, I don't know what that means. Maybe it means you'll be ministering to people in a place where almonds grow. Or maybe it means you'll be ministering to people with almond-shaped eyes. And it's like, wow, really good guess, my dude. It's already known that I want to be a missionary. It's not a hard, he had plenty of opportunity to talk to my parents and figure out that I, at the time, felt called to missions and maybe the types of areas that I was feeling led to go to. So I don't take much stock in that. What I do find more interesting about this dude is that one of the other times that he came to my parents' church, he felt that God was maybe telling him that his son and I were meant to be together. And so my parents told me this, and I was given the info to get in contact with this guy's son. This was while I was in college for missions. And we talked. It was really awkward. He really wanted me to join YWAM, which YWAM is Youth with a Mission. And boy, could I do a separate video about that group and the abuse that's happened there and just how terrible it is. In fact, if you are listening and you are a former YWAM person and you would want to share some of your story, get in contact with me, whether that's just emailing me and telling me stuff or me having you on for some type of interview for that. I would love to get your perspective. I think that might be a little bit more interesting than me just reporting stuff that has happened in YWAM. I felt that that was silly because I felt at the time YWAM wasn't as serious or dedicated as what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be a fully appointed missionary with the Assemblies of God. And so why would I go do YWAM, which is another short-term thing, and their discipleship training, when I was already in college studying to be a full-time missionary? It just didn't make sense. So we didn't get together. So I guess he was wrong, at least on that count. Yeah, so prophets, very interesting. 2, my mom. My mom just always tended to know things. And she would always claim that God told her. She never herself claimed to be a prophet. She always had a really good intuition, at the very least. But one of the things that broke it for me a little bit of the thought that God was directly revealing stuff to her was that in middle school, I was not allowed to read the Harry Potter books, which were the hottest thing when I was in middle school. And me saying this is in no way an endorsement of J.K. Rowling. Fuck J.K. Rowling and all the stuff that she's doing to harm trans rights in the UK and globally. I don't support her, and I don't recommend anyone supporting her. But just remember, this is like me in middle school. This is before we know all that stuff about Joanne. And I wanted to read these books, but they were forbidden because they were of the devil. But a friend was lending them to me. So I was putting those stretchy book covers over them to hide what they were and just being very careful about when I was reading them. when I had read up to, I think, The Prisoner of Azkaban, that's when I got caught. And my mom said that the Lord had revealed to her that I was reading those books behind her back, which at the time, I was absolutely floored. I did wonder if she had maybe just seen them and looked under the cover. That was a possibility. But guess what? God didn't tell her. Unless God was revealing it to her through another person. The girl who was lending me the books felt guilty about lending me books that my mom didn't want me to read, even though she thought the books were fine. And so she snitched. The girl who was lending me the books to read snitched and told my mom. So no, God did not reveal to her that I was reading that. God had nothing to do with it, unless you want to say that God convicted my friend. But if the books truly were evil, why would he just convict her to tattle on me that I was reading them and not convict her to not read them? I don't know. So, yeah. But on the thought of intuition and moving on to myself. So in Christian circles, the Assemblies of God included, there's this thing called the Spiritual Gifts Inventory. It's a little test where you answer a bunch of questions and then you tally it up to see what your spiritual gifts are. And I would never call myself a prophet. I have never called myself a prophet except in jest. Like, I've jokingly said that I'm a prophet when I've predicted something, but I've never said it seriously. But when I took this spiritual gifts inventory, it was one of my gifts. My gifts, I believe, that scored the highest were apostleship, prophecy, compassion, discernment, I think, and maybe like helping. I was just full of the gifts. And apostleship in this is about having the gift of spreading the gospel to other cultures and in foreign lands, using the words of the inventory. So it was, pointing out that I would be a good missionary, which is what I became. But prophecy was up there. And so let me just read for you what the definition of prophecy is for this spiritual gifts inventory, because you'll notice it's a little different from the way that it's defined when it's people like Hank Kunneman spouting off his silly prophecies.
I will shift in your schools where the commandments will be placed once again at the forefront of the school. I will shift your schools where once again my word will be read and prayers will be given unto the one and true God.
So this defines prophecy as the gift of speaking the word of God clearly and faithfully. Prophets allow God to speak through them to communicate the message that people most need to hear. While often unpopular, prophets are able to say what needs to be said because of the spiritual empowerment they receive. Prophets do not foretell the future. Hank? They don't. But they proclaim God's future by revealing God's perspective on our current reality. And all of the things that made me score high enough to get prophecy as one of my spiritual gifts are things that I still possess today. And one, namely, is intuition and autistic pattern recognition, being able to see patterns and understand things allows you to be in a position where you can communicate the message that people most need to hear, like this says. Not from God, but messages that maybe inspire them, maybe edify them, or maybe help them see something that they were missing or not noticing. And so am I a prophet? No, I am not a prophet. I'm just really good at noticing things and then understanding the person that I'm talking to and articulating to them in a way that's helpful and understandable to them. But part of the reason why this spiritual giftings inventory says that prophets don't foretell the future is, I think, to help keep Christianity from further fracturing in some ways. Because while in the Old Testament, you see examples of a lot of prophets who are predicting and foretelling the future, at least are claiming to in their narratives. If you research some of these, you'll see that some scholars believe that these were written after the fact, or certain books you can tell when they were written based off of all the prophecies will be correct. And then at a certain point, the prophecies stop being accurate and you have to do mental gymnastics to make them work. And so scholars will predict, oh, this book was written at this time because all these prophecies before that are correct. They're just writing prophecy about past events as if it was written in the past. But all of these ones going forward that are incorrect are after the time of writing. But that aside, if we take the Bible at face value and just like believe it whole cloth, in the Old Testament, you see examples of prophets who are predicting the future. In the New Testament, you don't see that so much, other than Jesus giving some prophecies, and then other than Revelation, which is a book that maybe doesn't belong in biblical canon. It is a little dubious about how and when it was added and what sentiments, what anti-government sentiments that the people who were adding it at that time wanted to push and infuse within Christianity. That's very interesting. And if you guys are interested in that, I can do a deeper dive on the book of Revelation and when it was added to biblical canon and perhaps why. But outside of that, we don't see a lot of prophecy that's Old Testament style. And the prophetic gifting that Paul talks about in his letters is more about this edification role, about speaking the words of God, which now are often interpreted to be biblical passages, so maybe giving the right biblical passage to someone at the right time, as opposed to predicting future events. Making this kind of distinction helps keep Christianity more pure, in a sense, because then people are always going back to the Bible. If you allow for new prophecy and prophecy today, that's how you get things like Mormonism that have a new revelation, in this case by Joseph Smith, with all of these extra things. And if you allow for that sort of thing, then Christianity is going to further splinter. You're going to have groups and cults, and you get that anyway. But this is kind of meant to curb it in a sense. But I also have experienced times where I have been prophetic in the future predicting sense. And once again, this isn't God telling me what's going to happen. What's happening is the exact same thing that makes it impossible for me to enjoy any type of procedural drama, is because when I sit down to watch it, I pick up all of the little clues and I know the patterns. And so I have the plot figured out like in the first 5 to 10 minutes. And so it's not fun to watch because I know exactly what's going to happen and it's too predictable. Unless it's a comedy like Psych, procedurals just aren't very fun for me because my predictive ability is too good when I can see the patterns. And life has patterns too. I don't have a perfect record by any means, and I would never claim to be a psychic or a prophet, but there have been times where I have correctly predicted events before they happen, and that's just called having intuition and pattern recognition. When I was still a Christian, I did at times believe that I would have prophetic dreams I'll give you just an example of one that was true, but I had many like this, where I would have a very clear dream and I would know what it meant And then I would be correct about that meaning, and it'd tell me something that I didn't directly know. So, for example, I had a dream one time that I was standing in a field, and across the field I could see a family member. And in the sky I could see a very large, dark crow circling, and then I called out to the family member to watch out and be careful because it was coming down for a landing. And they didn't move, and they got crushed under this bird into the field. And when I woke up, I immediately knew what it meant. I knew that it meant that this family member was struggling with depression. It had, blindsided them. They hadn't been prepared for it, and it just crushed them. And so I let some people know, and those people called this person's college that they were at. And it turned out that this person had stopped going to their classes. And when further investigation was done, they were just sleeping most of the day in their dorm room because they were dealing with very intense depression. Now, was this truly a prophetic dream? I don't think so. I think that I intuited that this person in my life that I knew in a certain circumstance was facing pressure and was prone to depression. And so dreams are just our brains processing stuff. Sometimes dreams make absolutely no sense, but it is just the brain doing its thing. And so my prophetic dream was just my brain processing this knowledge. It wasn't actual prophecy. I wasn't actually supernaturally predicting anything. It was just a very natural process. And like I said, a lot of the things that made me prophetic before have not gone away, other than the dreams. The prophetic dreams are gone, but that's because I'm on medication for PTSD nightmares, the same kind that soldiers are on. So I don't dream very vividly anymore, and I hardly remember my dreams, but I will gladly take that over PTSD nightmares any day. So worth it. So that's my little story about my personal encounters with prophets and prophecy. But I'd love to hear if you have any experiences with prophets, or if you've ever correctly prophesied or predicted a future event. And if you feel that you were given that knowledge supernaturally, or if you think you maybe just were able to intuit it. But with that, I hope you have an awesome day and a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.